Okay, hello everybody that has dialed in for the webinar this morning. Welcome to this Charters webinar on the evolution of crime analytics. My name's Q-Lay and I'm from Wynyard, so I'll be the moderator today of the webinar this morning. Today we've got two main presenters. We've got Payman Mestian, who's the Managing Partner at Charters Research. He's going to talk through some of the key themes from the recent Charters report that I believe many of you have already read. So he's going to touch on some of the key findings from that research paper. After that, we have Jim Oakes, who is the Director of Financial Crime at Wynyard Group. Jim is a former fraud squad detective and a certified fraud examiner and has a wealth of experience as financial crime director in banks all over the world. So he is going to share some of his real-life experiences around the application of advanced analytics in financial crime and fraud. We also have Joshua Brammel, who is a solutions consultant here at Wynyard. In case any of you have any questions about the technical capabilities of some of Wynyard's software. We won't be showing a demonstration of the software today, but if you would like to see any of that in more detail, please do get in touch with us after the webinar. So just a few housekeeping things. If everyone could please ensure that you're on mute throughout the webinar, that will just help with the audio for everybody who's listening in. If you've got any questions, please do ask them in the questions box on the right-hand side. You can type those in and we will be able to receive those and answer them at the end of the session. We are recording the session today, so this will be available for everybody, and we will also provide a full list of the questions and answers if we don't get time to get through them all today at the end of the webinar. So with that, I will hand over to Payman to start off the presentation this morning.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. The next 20 minutes or so, I will cover, as Quilly said, some of the key trends in crime analytics. For those of you who know Charters, we've been researching this space now for the last 5-6 years, and we've seen a lot of new developments, but also still quite a lot of old problems and obstacles to success. So I will be discussing some of that, some of the key challenges, both in terms of usage and implementation. But then I'll move on to discussing some of the key enablers for success and discuss future outlook. So that should take about 20 minutes or so, and then I'll hand over to Jim, who will cover some of the leading practices from Wynyard and other industry observations. So if I can have the next slide, please. I think there might be a delay. There we go. So, I mean, first of all, just to position what we mean by crime analytics in the context of the research that we've done recently, I think as most of you will know, crime comes in many different forms, and almost all of these can be countered in one way or another by some kind of analytical capability. I think traditionally, sort of previous common way to separate crime was to differentiate between financial and non-financial crime. Previously, organizations have utilized different crime analytics tools and techniques to address the two categories. It was quite a siloed approach. In the sort of non-financial crime area, normally police and government agencies, solutions tended to prioritize link analysis and geospatial and temporal analysis, whereas in the financial services industry, financial crime solutions tend to focus on capabilities such as transaction monitoring and KYC functionality, rules engines, and so on. What we're seeing in today's crime environment, that there's a significant overlap between financial and non-financial crime analytics. I mean, first of all, financing itself is a significant element of almost all major crimes. So that there's a funding and there's movement of money and cash required. Therefore, all organizations, financial and non-financial, need to adopt a combination of analytical techniques, and we're seeing that in the industry. Financial institutions are increasingly utilizing techniques that were previously only used by law enforcement, maybe around, advanced case management, and some of the geospatial techniques are coming into it, and vice versa. Next slide, please. So if we think about what we see as some of the current challenges in crime analytics today, I think advanced crime analytics, some of the advanced techniques that have been around for some time, have traditionally been in the domain of the large Tier 1 organizations, either Tier 1 banks with large budgets and capabilities and skills, or the larger government agencies and law enforcement agencies. That's where some of the leading edge research and development has been done. But this means that often crime analytics has been too costly for the small and mid-sized firms. They could not traditionally afford the expertise and technology required, and that accessibility has been a challenge. The other area has been around usability. Analytical technologies have tended to be usable only by power users, advanced users with very advanced mathematical or sometimes PhD level skill sets, and that itself has acted as a barrier in terms of usage by business users and frontline decision makers. The third area of common challenge that we've seen in the industry is the complexity of the IT environments themselves. Here we're talking about siloed legacy data systems for many firms, different data types, different systems and functionality, different source data, and bringing all of that data together to make sense of it and identify fraudulent behavior is a technical challenge. It's an IT challenge. Other challenges that we're seeing emerging more and more in the marketplace is the increasing availability of unstructured data, both internal and external. So this is going into the zone of so-called big data, although that's got many different definitions. But we're talking about emails, messaging, social media, internet. And there are many hidden clues. Whenever there's been a major incident, criminal incident, post-incident investigation, the reverse engineering that's been done has shown that actually there were plenty of clues in memos, emails, and unstructured data. Unfortunately, that data is very complex and very difficult to analyze, and we'll touch on some of the tools and techniques around that later on in the presentation. Another key challenge in the industry is this issue of noise versus signal. This is the whole area of false positives. Going back to the previous point of large amounts of data, complex data in terms of both volume and variety that needs to be analyzed, that also lends itself to many false positives, a lot of noise, a lot of risk identification, which sometimes results in negative impact on reputation, customer relationships, and also very costly investigation processes when there's false positives. So false positives, often when we do surveys and interviews of practitioners, is one of the top priority areas in terms of optimization of routines, optimization of rules to reduce that. And then finally, the most sort of maybe this is a bit of a philosophical point, but actually it's got huge practical implications, is this area of unknown unknowns. Traditionally, most crime management systems have been based on predefined rules, i.e. looking for patterns that are already known. So it's the known unknowns, and rule-based systems lend themselves to then turning into an industrialized process for identifying and applying those rules. That creates a certain bias towards what you know, and searching for what you already know you should be searching for. what it stops you doing and makes it very difficult to do is to discover the unknown unknowns and discover those new patterns, those new combinations. And going forward, I think any sort of comprehensive crime analytics solutions needs to have both the rule-based, the search capabilities, as well as the discovery of new patterns, the discovery capabilities, and getting the right balance there, I think is a critical success factor. Next slide, please. So in summary, this is our view of how crime analytics has evolved over the last, well, 30 years, as far as that slide is concerned. In the 80s, crime is not new, and analyzing crime is not new, but the tools and techniques have evolved from paper-based, moving to spreadsheets and simple database technology, relational databases, and in the post-2000 period, we started moving towards rules-based, search-based analytics, and data visualization, and link analysis. And now, really, in the current time horizon, we are moving towards looking at unstructured data, big data, text mining, and moving towards machine learning and artificial intelligence, in which case we call it assisted intelligence, providing those discovery capabilities to the analysts, to the decision makers, to predict crime and not just react. So it's moving from reactive to proactive scale there on the x-axis. Next slide, please. So on this slide, I'm perhaps maybe just expanding on the point I made earlier between search and discovery. For us, crime analytics, for it to move into the next generation, needs to look at complex data sets, not necessarily data of the same type. It's mixing of structured data coming from transactional systems, from email, from voice. Even if we think about how, for example, the financial services industry itself has evolved from traditional banking into internet banking and now mobile banking, and all of those potential sources. Those are all technology enablers for improving business, but they also are potential sources of threats. And analyzing the data that sits within devices, that sits within transaction systems, trading systems, it requires complex discovery, which is very difficult to do with the human eye. It does require automated tools and techniques. So that's really the next generation of crime analytics. Traditionally, crime analytics, for it to be successful, and because of the constraints in technology, data scientists have previously had to put boundaries around the amount of data that they were analyzing. And these boundaries might have been by type or by size of a scale or volume of data. The new modern world of crime analytics actually requires very large storage, big data storage capabilities, and taking those boundaries away and allowing the data scientists to create hypotheses and what-if analysis and have the analytical and technological agility to go in many directions and discover new criminal behavior. So the idea of flexibility and adaptability is very important. Traditional crime analytics had a sense of being black box, inputs and outputs, and the analytics itself was a little bit out of the box. The new generation requires an open box, full transparency. It's not just enough to throw out suspicious reports or suspicious behavior. You need to be able to show the logic, the analytical logic that got you there. That's both in terms of internal justification, but also for regulatory transparency as well. And finally, I think this is probably the greatest point, and from my perspective, and I know Jim will cover this in a lot more detail later on, is this ability to connect the dots you know, within an analytic system, the value of a point of information can only be found when it is connected to another point. And that's, you know, that connection is what results in the pattern recognition that's required for advanced crime analytics. So we see that as being a big part of the story of moving to the next generation. Next slide, please. So next slide, please. Right. So, so what are some of the key enablers for advanced crime analytics? Well, you know, as I mentioned, ideally a crime analytics solution will combine search-based reactive approaches with proactive discovery-based approaches. There are a number of capabilities required to make that happen and make it usable and put the power in the hands of the end users. One is around data visualization. You know, one of the problems of dealing with large and complex data sets is that they can appear visually. They can appear as very large and complicated arrays of numbers, making it challenging for anyone without a strong mathematics background to determine exactly what it means and when something is going wrong. There's a new generation of data visualization tools out there in the marketplace now, which are particularly powerful tools in the respect of presenting the information in an intuitive manner. Sometimes it's you know heat maps, but sometimes those heat maps are superimposed on you know, geographical maps, and you know, there's trends and network models that are visual that help the analysts very quickly home in onto the 2 or 3 areas of concentration that need to be prioritized. Data acquisition is very important, as we mentioned. You know, there's a big the analytics is only as good as the data that is being used. Therefore, data integration and bringing data into the analytics environment is a key obstacle, and therefore using new, fast, and easy data ingestion tools is a big part of the enabling technology that's required. And as part of that, it's not just about bringing the data in, it's around making sure the data is of the highest quality. So we're talking about data cleansing, data validation, data testing, and creating that level of consistency and trust in the data before the analysis starts. So, that data acquisition and data integration are key enablers to success. We've already talked about rules engines, but, advanced rules engines which are scalable and also adaptable. Business rules for crime analytics, they're not static. They're dynamic. The criminals are dynamic. Therefore, ongoing maintenance and optimization of rules and easy maintenance and optimization of rules is a key enabler to success. And ideally, you should be able to, firms should be able to do that at the end user level, not having to go back to IT every time there's a change to be done. So we are seeing a lot of investment by some of the leading vendors around optimization tools and toolkits that are put in the hands of the analysts for managing rules and optimizing and getting the results. Scalable and federated search. So here we're talking about scalable searches that allow the user to drill down into the data, providing real-time and ad hoc access to analysis. With the need to respond to today's quick-changing markers and fast-acting electronic crime, let's say around credit card fraud, batch processing, the traditional batch processing technologies are not sufficient. We're seeing more and more movement towards real or near real-time technologies for rapid identification, but also rapid reaction to criminal behavior. With regards to federated search, this is a transformation and broadcasting of a query to a group of disparate resources, such as multiple databases, followed by the presentation and sorting of that of the results. So scalability of the technology and the distribution of findings and alerts in a rapid time to market and time to intelligence is very important. Link analysis we've already touched about. That's a key capability, being able to connect the dots. And then there are various types of analytics that we're seeing more and more usage on both sides, financial and non-financial crime, around geospatial analysis, temporal analysis. With the temporal one, I think that's been used for some time in law enforcement, but we're seeing more and more that coming over to the financial industry as well. Crime analysts traditionally conduct several levels of temporal analysis, including the examination of long-term crime trends and the natural variations by season or by day or by time of day. And we're seeing that kind of sophistication also coming into financial institutions. And then, the final one, assisted intelligence. Some people sort of use AI as artificial intelligence being used in financial crime, and there are various machine learning and data mining tools and techniques out there which are in the zone of the traditional definition of artificial intelligence. The reason we use the term assisted intelligence is that we think that it's still, to do crime analytics, it still requires significant input from a human analyst. So it's really the intelligence that's created using machines or advanced techniques is to assist the analyst to get to where they want quicker and more consistency, and at the same time reducing false positives. So various AI techniques and tools are coming in around prediction and discovery, and we will see more and more of that being used over the coming years. Next slide, please. So really, I just want to close off on some comments about where we see the future of crime analytics. I think as the criminals get more innovative, and believe me, they are getting more innovative day by day, using both technology, but also getting much more organized about it, particularly around cross-border criminal activities. So do the institutions, be it financial or non-financial. We all need to get more innovative. Areas of innovation will include actually a coming together of lots of different disciplines, around mathematics, around computer science, around artificial intelligence, data science, and actually psychology and organizational capabilities as well. All of this, this is a network problem, and it requires a network solution. By network, I mean a network of knowledge bases and a network of skills and capabilities. We are definitely now seeing a shift towards the use of software as a service solutions in the marketplace. Particularly for large-scale crime analytics. If you think about the processing and the database structures required for discovery-based analytics, looking for those unknowns that we were discussing earlier, this cannot be implemented in a cost-efficient manner for most firms. And we are seeing some very large organizations investing millions of dollars in creating the infrastructure for advanced analytics, but that infrastructure is not really accessible by the mid-sized and small institutions, and that is what's creating a shift towards software as a service capabilities, shared services, shared analytics, and using external infrastructures on a rental basis. So we are seeing that already in some of the established areas, such as anti-money laundering and KYC, as software as a service. But we believe we will see that also move towards some of the advanced discovery-based analytics as well. I've already mentioned the increased movement from search to discovery and the use of machine learning tools and techniques. The appetite for that is growing all the time, and there's lots of knowledge and capability coming from other industries, from military intelligence, even from social media, from Silicon Valley, Eastern Europe and Israel. We're seeing some very advanced tools and techniques coming into financial crime analytics now as well. And that same thing applies to assistant intelligence. I think I put a note here around reputational risk. We are seeing, when we look at business cases out there by organizations for investing in crime analytics, increasingly the impact on reputation, impact on brand is a big part of that, and trying to control, not just prevent an event happening, but also should an event happen, how do you get smart about minimizing the propagation of that event in terms of impact on reputation. So again, that's where social media is a source, is a threat, but also it can be used as a tool for managing and mitigating impact on reputation. So we're seeing a lot of research and a lot of work being done around that, and areas such as sentiment analysis come into that area of science. And then the final trend that we're also seeing in the marketplace, I think is a big area for the future, is that crime analytics will involve sharing of data across borders. This is regionally, internationally, and between the financial and non-financial areas of crime analytics. There are some pockets and of best practice around that already, around certain areas, be it around fraud or KYC, but I think that will become the norm in terms of data sharing and creating data utilities that are accessible across border by everyone. So those are the key trends for the future, and I think that's my last slide for my presentation, and I will now hand over to Jim.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for that introduction, Payman. I just wanted to go through the first few slides rather swiftly, really just to touch on some of the areas which we are all concerned with, and particularly in relation to the growth and development of organised crime and the threats that we as financial services or the financial services sector face on a daily basis. Not only are the banks themselves finding vulnerability and being targeted by organised crime if they are seen as the weakest link in the chain, and in relation to specific client and customer types, high net worth clients, the elderly, on a whole range of particularly fraud and scam activity are being targeted, and more banks are being involved in identifying this activity at an early stage to protect themselves as organisations and also the clients. The problems today in relation to the scale and complexity of global international crime, which Payman touched on at the end of his presentation, where a lot of work is being done in sharing data not only across the industry but regionally and internationally, and there are a number of legal challenges that have created problems in making this effective. However, with the use of new technologies, the ability to examine data without actually accessing sensitive core data is readily available, something that I agree with Payman that we will see more of in the future. Some of the key areas that we concern us, certainly on the money laundering, the fraud and cybercrime, the numbers are quite, as you can see, quite outstanding. Human trafficking still is quite a serious and growing problem, and one of the sad aspects of the human trafficking is that today an individual can be exchanged for as low as a few $100s, where back in 1808, when slavery was at its height, it would be as much as $1,000 per individual. So the sale of people, for particularly in the sex trade, and the ongoing money laundering that comes off the back of that is something that is becoming a real issue, certainly here in Europe, for us to deal with. The scale of the problem, so next slide, In relation to fraud, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners estimate that 5% of revenues each year are lost to fraud. And in 2013, the gross world product estimated fraud losses of about 3.7 million. Again, these sums are probably the tip of an iceberg. I suspect it's potentially more. However, from an investigator's point of view, the average loss caused by these individual frauds, as the study reports, covers is $145,000, and 24% of the cases that were examined last year were in excess of $1 million. But the interesting aspect is the length of time, and this is a common theme in the past 20, almost 25 years that I've been involved in the financial services sector, and prior to that as a police detective. The length of time which frauds would go undetected has always been a real issue in relation to reducing the losses. And in the case of the last fraud study last year from the ECFE, the average case was about 18 months. And quite often these are incidents that do come to light as a result of whistleblower activity. So where is all this information getting out to, and how are they getting access to? And if we just look at the growth of data, in the past 2 years, it's estimated that 90% of all data was created in the past 2 years. That's an incredible exponential growth. And as you can see on the image, those of you who are viewing this on the laptop, so on the right-hand side, an example of the size of interconnectivity on the Internet, and the Internet of Things, i.e. it's no longer just laptops and PCs that access the Internet. We have our fridge freezers, we have home devices, we have utility meters. There are a wide and growing range of household items that are interconnected with the Internet, and these are connected to security systems. And these are all points at which criminals can access systems or core systems, and whether it's the home, a business, or a bank, the massive increase in relation to the scale of this, i.e. the golf ball was representative of all interconnectivity on the net today, that within 3 years it would be the size of the sun. You can only imagine that the growth in criminal activity and their ability to access these points of access into our systems, whether it's personal or business, will grow at the same scale. Another interesting slide is looking at online activity within 60 seconds. I won't labour on this particular slide, but it's available to download with the presentation after this event. But you can see the scale of activity, the volume of emails, of images, video recordings, tweets, considerable amount of data, social networking information out there. And of course, this is a gold mine to organised crime. And likewise, it should be something that we as organisations should be utilising to assist us in our intelligence, our analysis, and on connecting the dots, which is something I'll touch on shortly. So there's a lot of opportunity there, both for organised crime and for, I think we've just jumped ahead to the next slide. So just touching on the complexity of criminal activity. Only this week, Action Fraud announced that there's a 71% increase on online fraud. And internal fraud, according to CIFAS last year, there was a 70% increase on internal fraud. So they are targeting our systems, they are targeting our data, and we need to be in a position technically to respond to this in a swift fashion. So fraudsters are now harvesting data, and of course they've discovered big data, just as we as banks have discovered that big data is something that we need to manage and benefit from. And that's where the technologies that we have available today through advanced crime analytics will assist. So I just wanted to just talk through some examples, some case studies that really sort of highlight some of the areas of weaknesses historically, and certainly where advanced crime analytics techniques are not used or ineffectively used. And I just want to talk through a couple of incidents of issues that advanced crime analytics would have assisted in resolving, and some of the impacts that did or could have happened as a result of these not being handled at that time. And then I'll just talk about the power of advanced crime analytics in relation to account takeover case example. So in the siloed approach, what I'm talking about, and those of you within the financial services sector will fully understand, is historically fraud, compliance, security, IT security, and physical security, for example, in banks have been sort of managed in a silo fashion, and even today many still are. And this particular case example involved an incident that came to the attention of an MLRO of a large international bank, and it was compounded by debt and fraud intelligence being also alerted to this. So we had the MLRO within the bank, we have a separate division, a bank card division, part of the same organisation, and then we have a UK international bank branch here in central London. So the MLRO's team, in relation to this particular incident, were made aware of large cheque payments being deposited, drawn on what was at the time Barclays Bank in Egypt, in Cairo, and the cheques were drawn on Egyptian pounds. Due to an operational error, a systems error, these cheques were allowed to be deposited to the account with immediate access to funds. So in other words, rather than pending clearance, which in the case of these Egyptian pound cheques should have been several weeks, the cheques were immediately cleared, and the volume of cheques that were being deposited drew the attention of the compliance money laundering team, which did the right thing. It reported this to what was the NCIS at the time, later SOPA, now NCA, and the report was effectively that these were suspicious large volume cheques being deposited. So effectively they had done their job. However, at the same time, the card division, which belonged to the parent company, were chasing these two individuals for outstanding debts of several $100,000 on their credit cards. Of course, they approached the bank branch in the UK asking for assistance in the recovery of unpaid debts. The UK bank were unable to assist because they felt they were a separate business and it wasn't their job to pursue their debts. So we have two departments, now three departments, viewing their own relationship with that customer individually. Although the fraud department were aware that large cash withdrawals were being made from ATMs on a daily basis, this did not draw any attention to the other cheque deposits, and as a result of which several $1 million were actually lost, and that was equivalent to about a year, almost 2 years profits for that particular branch. So we had the AML team aware of one area of suspicion, we had a fraud team aware of another, and clearly with the bad debt, unpaid debt, there was suspicions that should have been aroused. Now, after about 3 months, these cheques have clearly, as some of you will probably have guessed already, all bounced, and the bank lost substantial funds. The position for that particular organisation at the time was that under the US criminal legislation, there is a thing known as collective knowledge. So in other words, if a business or individuals within a business have pieces of information relating to a particular criminal offence, in this case money laundering, then the business was deemed to have a collective knowledge. So there was a liability from a legal perspective, as well as the penalties from the regulator for failing to act and pick up this particular risk. So again, we have, and we still have today, fraud and the AML teams working separately with their own access to data, not particularly well shared, if shared at all. So in the case of the cheques that were being bounced over a period in time, although the bouncing didn't take place for some weeks, a fraud examiner would have identified that as a classic cheque kiting, a specific type of fraud that's quite common. But of course, you wouldn't expect someone in a compliance team whose role is to manage compliance and notifications and reports to identify that type of fraud activity. So really, in that siloed approach, there was clearly areas which utilising an advanced crime analytics tool to look enterprise-wide across the activity. This would have been particularly would have been picked up at a very early stage, and I estimate probably less than 20% of the losses would have occurred if this had been effectively managed utilizing today's technology. However, this scenario, I suspect, is not unique to 5, 10, 15 years ago, and is probably just as applicable today under the same circumstances. So again, we have various functions within the banking system looking at data, suspicious activity, suspicious data in a siloed approach. And of course, the technologies are available now that we can actually start mapping those high risks and those potential risks to the organization at a much earlier stage. The second case I wanted to touch on, a more brief example, is where we are not particularly good at analyzing our own data. And again, this is something I've experienced in the past, and aware of other organizations have also suffered the same, where we have perhaps had a customer who's involved in first-party direct fraud against the bank. The customer's account is closed, and that relationship is closed. If there's sufficient evidence to report to the police, depending on the case, it will be, but occasionally that doesn't happen. So you'll have a former customer, no longer a customer of the bank. However, not long after, or within the next 18 months, they apply for a job in the bank. And believe it or not, I'm aware of a number of cases where they've been employed, in fact, on one occasion, employed in a fraud department. And you can imagine then what happens is within a few months of getting into the fraud department or into the bank, they have access to sensitive customer or operational information, and again, fraud occurs. So again, we have gaps within the organization where perhaps we should be looking at data within HR records, within employee records, looking at telephone numbers, looking at addresses, and looking for those links that would probably indicate that we should be aware of a particular risk at a much earlier stage. And again, failure to recognize this has resulted in not only problems within the organization, but then regulatory issues and also potential criminal or civil actions. Another case I wanted to touch on was a collusive or a corrupt IT security head, where monitoring of high net worth accounts would have identified his touch points. In this particular case, this individual was involved in a series of thefts assisting external organized crime. And one of the aspects that we subsequently discovered in this case was that the funds that were stolen were moved to a very small and obscure bank in southern Spain. The inquiries also revealed that on 2 occasions when the Spanish bank, these are inquiries subsequently following the identification of the fraud, but the Spanish bank had actually called this particular branch, which was in Europe, on 2 occasions to verify transactions, high-value transactions. The IT security head at the time was able to intercept and take these calls, and the way he did this was on both occasions, being aware that a call was due to come in at a specific time, he actually initiated bomb threats against the bank, and the bank building was evacuated, which gave him access to a high security area where he was able to take the call, confirm the payments, and again, the activity would have been picked up on examination of his viewing of internet logs where he was accessing prior to these frauds. He was the only person in the organization who actually looked at the website for this particular bank in Spain several times before each theft, and then subsequently he was looking at these accounts through the web in his office to check that the funds had arrived. And again, these are all areas of data which together, connecting the dots, as we discussed earlier, could be picked up, could be analyzed, and could be flagged up as suspicious, potentially suspicious activity. In that particular case, we also had camera and access logs through the building, and these again have the ability to be logged and connected using advanced crime analytics. Geomapping, geospatial mapping of movements and of activity also would have been useful in cases I've dealt with in the past, whereby attacks or incidents taking place across branch network or across ATM networks, which an automated system will be able to predict, as a result of previous attacks, direction of travel. For example, one particular case where a group working from the north of England were targeting ATMs in a particular pattern, which on geomapping it became quite obvious that you could predict the actual next zone or the next region to be hit, and even down to the next particular series of ATMs in that particular area. So again, the geospatial mapping is an extremely powerful tool in our armoury. And then just to go on to a more positive case, an example of a bank which did utilise account monitoring in relation to a series of ongoing frauds. The particular organisation decided to look at the online banking, telephone and postal nodes that were being touched on, branches, direct debit, and transaction activity, including the use of credit cards. And using the advanced crime analytics techniques, they undertook the following exercise, and that exercise was to look at this in a lot more detail and to examine internet logs of employees and staff who were involved in handling or viewing or touching on the accounts that were targeted, and externally sourced industry fraud sharing data also revealed the extent to which these criminal groups had infiltrated the accounts that were being targeted. As part of the investigation, the email, internet logs were examined. These provided a wealth of information and intelligence on the activity of both the collusive employees and external criminals. Externally sourced information and industry fraud sharing data also revealed the extent to which these criminal groups had infiltrated the organisation and the true scale of their activities. And it's been long recognised that where a business has an internal employee working together with external employees, the criminals' impact on the business is often quite severe, both in terms of the loss and complexity and other time-consuming investigations that have to be undertaken. Next slide. So really, I guess the key message and the issues that we're aware of is the wealth of data which is becoming available not only to us as organisations, but to organised crime and their attempts to commit fraud and attack the banking system. Next slide. Yeah. So it's estimated that banks effectively only use about 15% of their existing data for financial crime, fraud, EML analysis. And again, as organised crime continues to take advantage of the new technologies and developments, they develop even more increasing complex techniques to commit financial crime. And the need for financial crime analytics has never really been greater. The advanced crime analytics solutions automate and enhance the techniques and intelligence, enterprise fraud management, and anti-money laundering, which is really where Wynyard can help support the business clients we have and the clients who are looking for these services in this area. So I would just like to wrap up at that and open the floor to any questions.
Thanks very much, Jim. I've got a couple of questions here, just going through them now. Josh, this is possibly one that you could answer. Just in relation to the data, how is this obtained, and what are usually the sources that financial institutions and or law enforcement might use to obtain these sources of data that they then go on to analyse?
Right, so we're obviously in a kind of changing period of time in terms of the availability of data, as Jim referred to. There are different challenges for private sector, for financial services and for law enforcement, but there are also requisite opportunities for both those sectors to share information better, and especially given what we've heard in the first presentation about the overlap between financial crime and traditional crime analysis. And that's definitely a field in which law enforcement can potentially develop further to improve their information sharing and intelligence sharing pathways and gateways, and that's something that I know is being developed in law enforcement in this country at the moment, and we're probably going to see that expand further, hopefully, over the next few years. But in terms of legislative requirements, there are differing concerns for law enforcement bodies than there are for financial services. In some ways, perversely, you might find that law enforcement can be freer with certain types of intelligence and information that's shared. In other cases, obviously, things can be more restrictive. But when it comes to analysis, there's still really just the kind of main acts of the Data Protection Act, Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, Proceeds of Crime Act, and so forth, that are restricting law enforcement. But I think there's a great deal of exploration still to be done when it comes to fully exploiting the opportunities available for open source research and exploiting open source data effectively. And obviously that's something Wynyard we're trying to encourage with things like unstructured text mining and entity extraction, which our product provides.
Yeah, sorry, it's Jim. I think it's fair to say that historically, I think there's always been an issue in relation to disclosures made to the law enforcement in relation to suspicious activity, and the issues have always been that there's very little feedback, and unfortunately that's due to the sheer volume. However, there is a lot of work in this space, and particularly with the NFIB, the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau, which has feeds and access and analytics from Action Fraud on the National Online Fraud Reporting Centre. They do circulate, certainly to senior security heads in all banks in the UK. They do have a circulation list, and they do send out regular alerts and warnings. In addition to that, as Josh said, there's a lot of work ongoing to see how we can better share more detailed information effectively within the confines of the Data Protection Act.
Great. I think we've actually touched on one of the other questions that we had, which was around how the private and public sectors use crime analytics differently. So I don't know if we've got any more to add there. But
yeah, I think from a public and private sector, certainly law enforcement have access to the most in-depth fraud reporting intelligence database available particularly through Action Fraud. Since Action Fraud was set up just a couple of years ago, up in, I think it's in Birmingham, they are now the centre for intelligence analytics and predictive modelling techniques that are being used to preempt and to close down ongoing criminal activity. So I think they have pretty unique access to data. That's something I would expect we as in the private sector, so the financial services sector, to have a wide access to, but the technologies available today will allow and will grow to allow access to input and queries from the financial services sector, which will raise alerts, further alerts with law enforcement, which collectively and jointly would be worthy of more detailed investigation. So I think there's a lot of exciting things that can happen going forward as a result of new technologies, which would have been a blocker in the past.
So if I can come on that as well, just on the one of the key differences between financial services and the non-financial side, particularly public sector government, is the overlap with other risk areas in financial services. So there's clearly a significant overlap between fraud and credit risk. So in fact, some of the largest anti-fraud initiatives that we've seen in terms of budget and implementation and change management, the lead sponsor within the bank has been head of credit risk, because the fraud numbers hit the bad debt, they hit the performance and ratio bad debt ratios of the bank. So the overlap between fraud, operational risk, credit risk, and ultimately, liquidity and brand and reputation. So this enterprise risk management approach, I think, is something that's more prominent in the financial services industry, and we are seeing chief risk officers now and risk and compliance departments merging. We've seen some of the largest banks, particularly in Western Europe and North America, now bringing risk and compliance under a single umbrella, single leadership, and that has a data system and analytics impact as well.
That's a very good point, Payman. I think it's not so many years ago I was involved in the BBE project looking at credit write-offs, and we found that at the time, and I suspect it's probably not changed much, about 20% of all credit write-offs were actually what we call fraud tainted, i.e. fraud at some point in time during the lifetime of that credit facility. So there is quite a high proportion of hidden fraud within credit write-offs.
Great. I think we are just sort of looking at wrapping up just on time now. It's 5 to 11. So with that, any further questions that we've got here, we will share with you via email in written format along with the recorded presentation. You can go to Wynyard's website to learn more, or contact Philip East, who looks after our customers in the EMEA region. So please have a look there, especially if you'd like to see any further demonstrations of the actual software itself. But thank you everyone very much for joining us today. We hope that you've had a great and informative session. Thank you very much to Payman and to Jim for your very insightful comments and experiences that you've shared with us today. Thanks very much, and have a lovely day.